Hello.
Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Hi. How are things? Good.
It's a overcast day here.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful day here, but I'm not feeling so good, so I'm going to be a little quiet today.
Okay.
Okay.
Whole family got strep, so we're all
Oh.
kind of.
Yeah. Okay, well, welcome to the meeting. I don't know if Jesse's going to be here, probably a little bit late, but he wasn't feeling well the other day, so I don't know. So why don't we do updates if people have them? We'll start. Who wants to start?
I can go ahead.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I guess I sent my update to the Slack, but there are a few resources that I've been working through. Steve Brunton's YouTube videos that he has that accompany his data science textbook. Those have been really good. And then the ReproNim machine learning course. There's some lecture videos. I've just done the lecture videos. It also comes with some workbooks. I guess I don't even know if I have full access to that yet. The videos have been good. So I've been learning a lot about machine learning. A few months ago, I started a seminar, intro to Python. Well, the first part was intro to Python, just syntax and stuff, and a lot of it I hadn't encountered before. The second part was called numerical methods, which was a lot of math, but still pretty easy. And then part 3 is coming up, and there are different tracks you can take, and I want to do the machine learning one. So I'm trying to get ahead of the game a little. So that's what I've been working on.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, it's wonderful. So you really have a strong interest in machine learning then, seems like.
Yes, I think it's interesting. I'm also just trying to develop some technical skills
Yeah.
that I'm lacking that could be applied in various ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, we've had we haven't talked about it as much this year, but last year or in 2020 and 2021, we did a lot of stuff with Neuromatch, and Neuromatch does have that sort of machine learning the neural networks machine learning component to it. So yeah, it's definitely glad that you're able to find things that you are able to learn from, and that's kind of what we've been trying to do with it's kind of what we've been trying to do with the education arm of things. I know that I've talked with Daniela. We had a meeting several weeks ago about putting together some curricula for things. So in this lab we don't really have any connections to a formal education apparatus, but we do have people find that they need to have some skills to do certain things, and so we try to offer some of these secondary things that you can do online, or just to ramp up and get up to speed on things. So we have some curricula like Neuromatch and some other things from the Santa Fe Institute, and the idea is to try to make a set of resources that people can go to and say, okay, what do I want to learn about? And then we have these things ready to go, so that would hopefully be something we could use in combination. So I mean, yeah, some of the things you've been talking about, I don't think we've actually pointed to any of those things, but
the neural match, you were talking about doing a slow track where you gather some of the resources and just make them available, and I'm definitely interested in that.
yeah, we had talked about. Well, I talked about with Danielle about it, and that would be good. And Jesse actually wanted to do this 2 years ago. It never happened. So it's this Neuromatch. It's 3 weeks, and you have just massive amounts of information that you get dumped on you, and you either get it or not, and then that's it. But with NeuroMatch, you have all the materials at your fingertips, so you can just basically slow it down and say, we're going to do this over the course of like a month or so. Can we, what? And then, that raises a whole bunch of other questions from that. Like, wait a minute, no, I didn't understand this. Because at the fire hose method, you're too eager to just say, yeah, I get it, and then move on, and you really don't understand it. And it's one of the drawbacks. One of the advantages is you get to introduce people to a lot of things, and you get familiar with them. Oh, hi, Jesse, how are you? Looks like he's here, so, okay. So, yeah, that's one of the things. And so, yeah, I don't know. We're still kind of organizing ourselves on this. We're still trying to figure out how to pull it off. So when we, maybe over the summer, we'll talk about it a bit more and try to get something up and running.
Well, I'll be in NeuroMatch this summer, so I'm happy to share the resources for sure. And absolutely. And I've also been digging into the Active Inference Labs stuff. They have a pretty interesting textbook that they've made through, what's it called? It starts with a C. It's like some really interesting kind of formatting, web-based publishing kind of thing. I'll think of it, or I'll look it up and get back to you. But that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess I can give my update, which is that I got the scholarship to Complexity Explorer, so I don't have to pay my $50. So that's great. And that's been really interesting because it's mostly taught by Will Rand, who with Yuri Ulensky made NetLogo. So really been digging into NetLogo and just kind of the underpinnings of agent-based modeling. And I've also been working my way through Ron Sun's, this is backwards, Cognition and Multi-Agent Interaction, which is super fun. And after really getting complicated with my Pass the Peas examples, I started to integrate more and more complex models for agent interaction. I started to realize, I think I'm going to start just doing this for the open source software development organization rather than these examples. Because real life is just infinitely complex.
Right. Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. Yeah, you're going to get into Ron's son. Jesse and I talked about Ron's son like a couple years ago. I think like there was a run on that in the Slack. So, yeah. So I mean, so you want to do the Complexity Explorer? Do you want to learn more about like agent-based modeling, and then you're reading the Ron Sun book? So I mean, how do you think that'll fit into your overall goal of
right for the GSOC project? I mean, I
Yeah.
think that I'm hoping that Complexity Explorer will give me a better understanding of just how to implement agent-based models, which so far I've gone through the first 2 or 3 units, and it's been very helpful. Just having somebody who this is all they do, just kind of say, and here's where I make this turtle turn this color, and I go over here. I'm kind of like, oh, I get it now. It's just kind of really nice just to have that. And then I'm really looking forward to NeuroMatch. But in terms of the Ron Sun and the way that it's working with GSOC right now, what I'm hoping will happen is Ron talks pretty specifically in some of his models about cognition and modeling it as a multi-agent interactive process. And so I'm kind of hoping just that by digging through all these models that are out there, I can kind of understand where the field's at and then move from there. But I think more urgent for the GSOC project right now is just figuring out concretely what the parameters of our model of this organization are. And so I think next week we didn't meet this week, so hopefully next week I'd love to hear what Hussein and Himanshu and everybody else, Christian, and what everybody else thinks about that, because I think it's a huge topic that is also possibly infinitely complex.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at, I guess, is kind of gazing at the infinite complexity around me and trying not to be overwhelmed.
What's the title of that book again?
This one is Cognition and Multi-Agent Interaction, and it's 2006. So it's a little old now, but still pretty interesting. And in particular, it's got this one great essay in it that I was just reading earlier that I was very surprised to find, but really happy to find, called Cognitive Science and Good Social Science. Basically taking economics to task in terms of the way that they model their things, and kind of bringing up these really important, especially when you consider something ethically, these really important questions of like how is this model relating to the real world, and how can we make sure that we're flexible enough to change as we notice that our model isn't reflecting the behavior in a way that's accurate or interesting or or other things.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Amanda and Brian, for your updates. That's very good. Now, Morgan, did you have an update?
Well, definitely some good things this week. I've also been getting into, and this is Agent Zero. It's Epstein's third book, like generative social science, and what's the first one? Anyway, similar kinds of things in that, just what people had been saying about NetLogo, which is that there's a lot of training material out there, that's centered around it, So definitely trying to dive into that, and again, because I think there's other good reasons for getting into Julia, but the agent-based modeling in Julia has lots of discussion about NetLogo examples, because they recognize that that's the that's where people have been focused for so long, and it is interesting how you've got this there's kind of like a unique or a different sim to real problem with these emergent simulations than over the kind of robotic simulation sim to real problems that we have, right? So I mean, in particular, like his examples, I mean, again, focused on social science, so they're modeling lots of like real world cases, but I can see a much larger difference between how is this simulation going to really relate to the what's happening in this particular conflict over here, versus I've trained this robot with these particular parameters, and like being slightly off in terms of your dexterity is very different than the kind of emergent simulations, and the differences between how hard it is to bring in kind of a real world problem and then apply these it's not quite the same as the kind of pie bullet examples that we've got with basically with all the robotics, but that was the other great book this week, Developmental Robotics, and which was just a nice. I've been just going through the references on neurorobotics.net, and this in particular was great, and it kind of covers robotic basics for the cognitive scientists, as well as the other kind of areas that you'd need to be aware of to be in this kind of interdisciplinary area, and I thought it was pretty useful.
Yeah.
And
who is the author on that?
It's Kangliosi. Sorry.
Okay.
Kangliosi and Schlesinger.
Okay, yeah.
Not sure if I'm pronouncing those right, but if you go to I think Jesse had noted this before, that if you go to neurorobotics.net and then I think it's like resources, they've got a reading list, it's basically a reading list as their resources, and it's got the radical embodiment author. Is it Sean? Yeah. And yeah, so it's a great set of. I mean, it's review papers as well as books. Yeah, so this was also, just covering the kind of simulation environments that you use for this. And again, like some of these, this iCub example was something that Human Brain Projects used for their neurobotics platform, for instance.
Yeah.
And again, a kind of a focus on developmental AI, as with a real emphasis on always on learning, continual learning, how to keep like not treat this as a tech engineering problem where it's like you train offline and then you go into production. Treat it more, be more biological about it. And yeah, it's been and so you've seen a lot of multi-agent reinforcement learning papers that I've been dropping in Slack. Just trying to get ready for CVPR tomorrow.
Oh wow! Okay.
Monday, and well, I mean, one, just to get caught up on the literature, because it's every year it's exponentially growing. Yeah, so and if there's any of the papers that are interesting or you'd like to follow up on, please do let me know.
Right.
I've been kind of just yeah, but and then the last thing I just wanted to say was that dish brain and the kind of things that are covered in the they've got they're using just a sheet of stem cells, self-organizing to train to play Pong.
Oh wow! Okay.
And that was the no, it's an actual research paper. So there's some great stuff there in terms of the stem cell prep, and it was also interesting covering going through the Levin Davies paper on synthetic morphology and some of the comments they make. One of the things that they really emphasize is that, like, the xenobots, that this is the skin cell. These are the skin cells when they're not in their usual environment, right? That they haven't made them. They haven't directed them to do anything. That this is just their self-organization behavior when they're not in the normal context of that developing organism. Anyway, sorry. It's just interesting, and how that if you look in this Friston paper, or what they call dish brain, they're just making a nice sheet. So there's some things there dropped in terms of just growing that, and also being able to image it, which would be an extension of that particular paper. But it's got some good stuff in terms of just the training an agent to play a video game, but also some really simple, it's not quite as complex as an organoid, and the kind of bioreactor and timing and things that you'd have to do to create an organoid. Creating spheroids, or the kind of just lattice dish brain are much simpler problems.
Yeah.
And what dish brain adds is just a little chip fabrication that you do to be recording and stimulating the self-organizing net. But it's a really nice paper that actually looks like a nice transition for while the organoid stuff gets fleshed out slowly.
Yeah. Well, we'll look at those in a minute. I wanted to I guess I didn't notice I didn't fully appreciate, like,
I dropped that in Breitenberg vehicles.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like things get dropped in the Slack, but why don't we look at those and see? So yeah, let's see. So I'll share my screen and we'll go through each of these. And I'm just really interested in see how they do all this because, okay, so the first one is this MarkTech post. This is just something Brian popped in on researchers from Cortical Labs developed dish brain. This is brain in a dish, you know. I mean, people have done this with neurons, but this is actually is this like transformed neurons or reprogrammed neurons, or is this like stem cells?
They're stem cells.
Okay.
They're stem cells. So they're just not trying to, you know, in this paper it's much simpler, much simpler aim, right? So they're not trying to do tissue generation.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the closest case to like we're trying to make a an artificial biological neural network.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, I remember when I was
on a chip.
Yeah. Sorry, I remember several years ago, I did a lab, or for a different lab I was in, I did a lab presentation on some of Michael Levin's work where he was looking at, so he's interested in bioelectricity in cells, and not just in like neurons, but in stem cells and in other types of cells. So you can actually get electrical potentials out of all different types of cells, not just neurons. Now, other types of cells don't have action potentials as they're currently known, but they have these potentials that you can measure. So you can use things like, you know, electrodes, which are, you know, transduce the electrical signals and you can record them. Or you can use something like voltage dyes, which if there's a certain voltage present, you get a certain fluorescence. And so you can use these types of measures to look at some of these electrical potentials in cells. So in a stem cell, you have certain potentials. In skin cells, you have certain potentials, and you know, in muscle and neurons, obviously you do. But what's interesting is that one of Michael Levin's hypotheses is that in stem cells there are electrical potentials that are self-organizing, that drive these cells to not only to certain fates, but also to certain positions in the developing organism. Or you're muted.
I just wanted to say, because I thought it might be relevant. You know, this paper that came out from Bristol, was it University West of England, on electrical activity of fungus.
Oh yeah, fungi.
Fungi. You know, and you know, another example of you know, these are cells that wouldn't be, you know, traditionally considered electrically active. But the paper, you know, it was interesting. I hadn't actually looked at it until a second paper popped up, not fungus related, but another kind of like biological computation paper. And then I thought, well, I should actually read this. This one. And it's cool what they do with anesthetics. I mean, they show that they can suppress the activity with anesthetics.
Right.
And you know, remove the anesthetic, the activity comes back. It's like pretty powerful.
Yeah. So with the original studies on bioelectricity, I mean, they go all the way back to like Galvani, and like back then, or Darwin even did some work on this. And like back then, you know, they didn't really know they didn't have like a neuron doctrine, or, you know, they understood that muscle could be stimulated with electricity. And so you have these pictures of people like with their faces being stimulated. They were trying to figure out like what muscle, you know, did in the presence of electricity. And it was pretty wild. But like they also didn't restrict themselves to thinking that like it was just neurons or just muscle. It was just like, you know, a lot of things had electrical potential. So, you know, it's interesting that we're kind of coming back to this idea that like, oh, maybe there's some, you know, things going on in other types of cells. And So I just think it's a nice historical aside. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. So yeah, this was the article here. This one, it discusses this paper. So this Cortical Labs is out of Australia. They're integrating neurons into a digital system. So they have this cell culture. It's a single layer of cells. And then they're looking at human and mouse cells. And they're able to basically, they don't really... Okay, so they're basically mapping it to a synthetic game of Pong. And this is a biological neural network, but it's I guess they're not neurons. They're actually stem cells or something, like some sort of cell on what they call a stem state. So they put figure 1 in here. You can't really expand it out, I don't think. No, that's not it. But this is the bioarchive paper. So basically, they map this to a game of Pong. Let me see if I can find the paper. That might be a little bit better.
I posted it below the Market Tech post thing.
Okay,
but yeah, there it is.
There it is.
That's it.
Okay, in vitro neurons learn and exhibit sentience. Oh boy, we're going to talk about that later. When embodied in a simulated game world. And so this is Carl Friston as an author on this, and some other people. So this is, so I got to go to the paper, the PDF. So this is from 2021. Wow, great.
It was just right before Christmas.
Yeah. What I want for Christmas is a dish of neurons to play Pong, or a dish of
dish brain.
Yeah, dish brain to play Pong. So okay, so this is the setup here. Figure 1. You have iPSC, which are induced pluripotent stem cells, and they raise them in these are the culture dishes here. They're flasks that you lay on the side, and so they're growing these monolayers, or I guess maybe they're multi-layers, but they're not like tissues, and you're maintaining them. You get neural induction, neural expansion. You get this neuronal culture. This is a primary cell culture, like basically harvesting the cells for this. And then this is the feedback loop here. So this is the input sensory information, which is ball position from the game. So your game is serving as the sensory environment. You're moving the paddle somehow, but you're not doing it as a human being. You're doing it as the neurons. And then there's an output, hit or miss. So you have this state, whether it's correct or incorrect. And so you have to make, there has to be a judgment made as to how to move the paddle so that it hits more often than it misses. And that's, I guess, the metric of learning. If it can not do that at random, it can do that better than random. So, and this is, of course, where they're stimulating the cell culture, and they're recording from the cell culture to get an output. And so I guess this is like, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out if these were like what the state of the culture was. It looks like they did some like transformation in their neuronal cultures, but I don't know what they're actually recording from. So yeah, I like this. People have done this before. Like they've taken cell cultures, and it's been like just regular neurons that they've plated on a microarray or a micro electrode array, and they've grown them up in this environment where the cells are making connections, and then they're able to record from the cells, and they've been able to play simple games like this. This isn't like a new thing. I mean, people have done this before. It's just, I find it interesting that they're using induced pluripotent cells, and they're using induced neurons, because a lot of at least the early work on induced neurons, people weren't really convinced that they were neurons. So you had to do a lot of validation to say that they're actually neurons. And the way that the way that we define a neuron is kind of interesting, because it's not straightforward. You'd think, well, a neuron is a neuron. Well, actually, neurons are very diverse, and especially in human cells, you have many different types of neurons, and they express all sorts of genes, and they have all sorts of phenotypes. And if you're making, inducing neurons from a stem cell culture or an induced stem cell culture, you're basically forcing the cell to go from this little circular cell to something with processes. It has to have processes branching off. It has to develop, like I said, the stem cells have electrical potentials, but sometimes those electrical potentials have to be modified. You have to have different ion channels expressed and so forth. So there's a lot that has to go on in these cells. And when you're inducing them from, usually you take a couple of transcription factors and you overexpress it, and you can get different types of neurons. So they're different, what they call cocktails for different types of neurons. But in this process, you have to get them to maturity. And so they're all, it's a very complex process. And sometimes they're active as neurons and sometimes they're not. So, what I'm interested in here, and I don't know if the paper goes over, and I'm not going to dig into the paper that much, but I'm just interested in knowing, what the diversity of responses are, because you can force, any cell with an electrical potential, I guess, to do this. The question is, what are the conditions under which it's learning well or learning poorly, and then what does that mean in terms of the cell? What properties is a cell, or in a cell culture, what do they generally have to do this? So it's just really interesting.
Absolutely right, and it's a real question that when Madeline Lancaster gave a talk was it like 2 months ago, or pretty recently, and with asking her about the UCSF criticism of the neurons, and saying these are it's not that they're not neurons, but that these neurons are stressed, and they're not natural, and so when I was asking her so what are the confounds of that, right? Good open question. What she was saying was just we try and get around that by really examining morphology and trying to get rid of bad apples. It's it wasn't really answering the question, but this is exactly why we would like to get to do redo this experiment so that we can have that raw data, right? Because again, in this particular case, it's in the fine print in the article, but this is a commercial company, right?
Right, and they're not going to give you
So that and it's and they're the fourth commercial company I found that are trying to basically weaponize stem cells. For some sort of aim. It's good. It's in the zeitgeist, right? It's just everybody, all the ML people are quitting their jobs and starting biology companies. I think it's good.
But well, that's the thing though. In this field, in stem cells and reprogramming, there's a lot of I don't want to say trickery, but there's a lot of you think of it as being very precise science, but in fact, a lot of the science is what will work, and what do I get to work, and then it's that's what you report. So
because it is. I don't think cocktail really gets it across. It's it's some sort of really fine recipe that you got to get all the planets to align and it'll work, right? Because she was basically also saying at the end, this is the Q&A after, she was saying they have a pretty major reproducibility problem,
right?
And so that was why she was trying to I forget exactly what the question was from this other person, but her response was really telling, because she was just the most reproducible protocol I have is this one that's neural tube. If you want something reproducible, go use that. Forget all this other stuff. So I would say, I mean, there's probably a couple, I don't know if it's like opportunities, but everybody's barreling ahead to try and get, an output. And I don't know how much there is really a focus on how different are these cells, and how does that change the kind of neuronal activity that we care about in the recordings. I think that recordings kind of diversity would be really interesting.
Yeah.
For instance, right? And I don't think that there's. Yeah, I could imagine that being something that people would try and just kind of gloss over,
right,
and kind of try and push ahead for the engineering, and to some degree with the kind of the same deep learning kind of thing where it's just like, hey, should GANs work as well as they do?
Yeah.
like, are we really getting a Nash equilibrium? And if not, does it matter? Right? Because it seems, there's this, unreasonable effectiveness. So anyway, I think it's interesting, and I was kind of thinking like maybe following the bad neurons would be actually interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but I did a paper with some colleagues about 10 years ago now where we looked at the diversity diversity inherent in reprogramming. So, you had a bunch of different types of input cells. We took a mouse and we took all different tissue types from a single mouse and reprogrammed all of those, did like stem cell fates, neuronal fates, muscle fates, and then we did like some human lines that were sort of from different sources, and then did the same thing and looked at kind of, and it's one of these things that like it's hard to do it systematically, but we just looked at it because no one's done this too much. Everyone's talking about the engineering question, and it's interesting. There's some interesting results, but it wasn't like something that was like, oh, here's the points. Okay, here's what the diversity looks like definitively, because it's very hard to get your head around that question of diversity, because you're looking at like maybe there are some trends in terms of like muscle or tissue type, like if it comes from a source like brain versus muscle versus skin. What is the different, because there are different precursor levels of gene expression in some of these source cells, and then what is it doing to this reprogramming process? Is it affecting its efficiency, or is it affecting its what the cells do later? So it's like, that's a question that not too many people ask. Now it's not been cited very much, but I gave a talk on it once and someone said, thank you for bringing this up because no one ever talks about it.
It came up, or it was Tony James in Oxford, who was first person that kind of was interested in actually getting, really kind of translational work with stem cell, and so he was the one who told me that like you can grab neurons nasally,
yeah,
and that was the first thing that seemed obvious, was like let's look at the difference between skin and neurons, in terms of how the later signs of stress and things like that after you're putting them through these transformations, right?
Yeah.
But starting from skin versus starting as a neuron,
yeah,
and then putting them through the same transitions and then seeing the effects.
Yeah. So going,
and this is the kind of thing where it's just like there could be lots of good work already happening doing that, but not being in the stem cell worlds. I'm not familiar with it, but that's what I would like to see.
Yeah. So going back to the original paper, there's a secondary question here, and I know that like this is going to be of interest to people because we're talking. I think they bring it up here about embodiment and perception. So this is of course you look at this and you say, well, this is all well and good. You can maybe establish a closed feedback loop here, between the cell culture and the video game, and then you have output of the cells and an input to the cells from the video game. And like I said, this is something that they've been able to do for like probably a couple decades now, with a very simple feedback loop like this, with a very simple control problem, I might add, where you have this one parameter that you're trying to balance. It's kind of like in computer science, they have this pole balancing problem where you're just trying to like adjust something so that you can match it. So in Pong, I don't know how many people are familiar with Pong here, but you have these two paddles on each side of the screen and the ball that bounces back and forth, and it's kind of like tennis where you have to the ball has to bounce back off your paddle and go back towards the opponent, and then whoever misses the ball first loses a point, and then that's the game. So it's a very simple game where you're moving something up and down on the screen and you're trying to match a stimulus or a ball that is heading towards your paddle. So you basically have to bat the ball away. And if you can do that, then you get a point. If you can't, then you don't. And that's where this output hit or miss comes from. So it's a binary thing. And, so this can all be broken down into like binary signals. Your input signals to the cells are binary. Your output signal can be binary, although this signal is going to be very complex, and it's going to be like this electrical signal that is recorded from a number of cells. So it's going to be a population signal. But I guess they're using, most groups do, they use some sort of algorithmic filtering to find, a decision signal. And that's going to be binary, so it's going to be move right or left, basically. So that's the signal, and then I guess there's an acceleration signal as well. But this brings up the issue of embodiment. And you say, well, there's no body here. There's, obviously the body, as such as it is this paddle. It's moving back and forth, and that's it. That's your body. And so you're taking, in fact, it's actually different from embodiment in the conventional sense, because this cell culture, which is the intelligence, is not really well mapped to this paddle. It's just kind of, getting a signal and responding, and there's nothing, it's only observing it indirectly, I guess. Although, you could argue that maybe it isn't. So the question here is like, what is the level of embodiment? And does this suggest that we don't need embodiment? Or does this suggest we actually need more embodiment? Or does it suggest that like stem cells serve as a sort of baseline of embodiment where, I have this population of cells and they're sort of getting a signal, and maybe there's, some way that as they behave in a population, that population gets structured, and that's maybe a form of embodiment as well. Our bodies our nervous systems are very tiered, in the sense that they have a lot of structure. It's not just like a blob of cells, and then there's an output, and then there's an input from the sensory world. It's that the nervous system is highly structured. You not only have feedbacks, but you have, like a spinal cord, you have, different types of sensory organs, and then you have different pathways that converge sometimes. Sometimes they're separated. So there's a lot of structure in the nervous system. And so, what does this all mean in terms of embodiment? I'm not sure they really get into the question too much here. They talk a little bit about the free energy principle, of course, because it's Friston. But, to address the second requirement, the system can be used to test key theories of how intelligent behavior might arise. One proposition for how intelligent behavior may arise in an intelligent system embodied in an environment is found in the theory of active inference. Previous work has established that neurons can perform blind source separation. And this is something, if you're familiar with the ICA method, statistical method, where they take signals and they try to find the independent components. They basically try to take like a signal that's convoluted and mixed up, which is what you get from these populations of neurons, and try to find what they call the independent components, the things that don't interact statistically. So that's what that neurons can do this. via state-dependent Hebbian plasticity that is consistent with the FEP. So these are all, Hebbian plasticity is just a mechanism that neurons usually use to learn. And so this is something that we can basically characterize what these neurons are doing to learn the stimulus to make, to get above chance performance. Now, the FEP suggests that any self-organizing system separate from its environment seeks to minimize its variational free energy. So this is where you just have the dish of neurons, and they're communicating amongst themselves. They don't have an input, actually, at this point. So they're just kind of like generating electrical activity. So in that kind of closed system, you're minimizing free energy. And so, or variational free energy, which is a measure that they're using for in FEP. So, that what does that mean? Well, that means that in a vacuum, basically, you're going to have this minimization. Now, in an open system, this is an open system because you have an input from the Pong game. Is it true that it's still minimizing its free energy, or is something else happening aside from this minimization? You can have minimization, but in an open system, you may not have this drive towards minimization as much. There may be, this might actually lead to sort of self-organizing structures, self-organizing forces that countervail this minimization. So, now they say the FEP suggests that any self-organizing system separate from its environment, which is key, seeks to minimize variational free energy. So systems like the brain at every scale may engage in active inference by using an internal generative model to predict sensory inputs that represent the external world. So in the brain, actually, there may be ways that the neurons actually generate this model when they're, they get sensory inputs, and then in between these sensory inputs, or in the absence of more sensory inputs, they create a internal representation that represents the external world, and then it's validated through additional data. So there's this process going on in the neurons. Once they're exposed to an environment, they have to start modeling that environment. The gap between model predictions and observed sensations, what they call surprise or prediction error, and that's something that if you learn about Bayesian methods, you'll find an interesting set of way that's formulated mathematically. Is minimized in two ways, and so they go through this. So they don't really give an answer here, I guess, is the answer. So by developing a system that allows neuronal cultures to be embodied in a simulated game world, so they're arguing that this is actually a form of embodiment in this game world, although, again, it doesn't necessarily imply embodiment, because we know that, like, if you're a person in a virtual environment, the virtual environment isn't necessarily the embodied part of this. It's actually the person's body, the egocentric viewpoint, and then you interact with this world. That's maybe also a form of embodiment, which, this is interesting because most of our world is us in a body interacting with the world, and that's our sort of what we're used to as embodiment. In this case, we have disembodied neural cells or reprogrammed cells, and then a game world, which is actually kind of separated from that culture. And so that's a very different form of embodiment, if it is indeed embodiment. So they're able to test whether cells are capable of goal-directed learning in a dynamic environment. And then as fundamental basis for intelligence, I would probably not go there. But yeah. So yeah, this is interesting, an interesting paper, interesting stuff. And then this other paper here, I don't know if this is, okay, so this is the fungi paper, Electrical Activity in Fungi, Spikes Detection and Complexity Analysis. Oh, this is Andy Adamatsky, who does a lot of stuff with this sort of stuff.
Right, the unconventional computing.
Yeah.
And complexity measures are typically used, or Koch and others have used compressibility as surrogate or kind of measures of levels of consciousness, and that's another reason to have these compression and information theoretic measures.
Yeah, and fungi are actually a pretty good model for collective behavior as well. So there's slime molds, and then there's fungi, and these mycelium networks that Andy studies. It's really all very interesting stuff. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with electrical activity, but also with sort of coordinating cells collectively in these kind of systems.
And it's super important for the organoid people too, right? Because it's going to be really interesting to see how much complexity, how much structure the fungi have, or fungi. Somebody tell me. And because this is the question that has caused a lot of ethicists to balk at the organoid stuff is that at what point should we be disturbed by the structure and the endogenous electrical oscillations, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to be like, here's some mold, and you get this picture, and I don't know if you've seen this picture, but he's like literally got this plate with like muck and then like 12 electrodes stuck in. It's kind of cool. It also kind of looks like something you'd see in a Doctor Who episode, but and like the mold is talking, and yeah. So it's actually really important to see like, well, how much structure are we expecting from mold, and so then now we're looking at say a 6-month or a 1-year-old organoid that is displaying fetal like oscillations. If there's questions about embodiment with dish brain, when it's like, yeah, there'll be questions about consciousness with all this very lifelike fetal electrical activity.
Yeah. So did Brian or Amanda have anything to say about that? I wanted to make sure that you got in.
I've just been taking notes. So this is fascinating. It's something I really don't know much about. I do think, though, that it's pronounced fun guy because that's one of my favorite jokes.
Well, it's like the recent movie that Stamets did. It's like The Hidden World of Fungi. Anyway, they pronounce it there. Yeah.
Amanda, do you have anything to say? Okay. I thought you might be interested in some of the embodiment question.
Yeah, I want to look at the paper maybe more closely. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Also, the reference, when he says that the cultured cortical neurons can perform blind source separation,
right?
It would be interesting, like I don't remember that work.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what they're referring to, but I mean,
yeah. Well, I see that one of those is another Carl paper.
Yeah.
Would be nice to see. So I'm definitely going to dig more into this, and it does relate to some of the Devo worm discussions, Bradly, or
right.
The woman. I've been again trying to catch up on the Devo worm.
Yeah.
Talks, and anyway, I know you had someone that has been working with stem cells more along these lines as opposed to organoids.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing some stuff. I know Susan does a lot of microscopy, where she's got these. She's got a microscope. It's what she calls a ball microscope, which has like 10 different cameras from different angles, and like taking that and merging it into like an atlas. That's what we're trying to do with one of the GSOC projects, is to create a 3D atlas, but having these different perspectives on the embryo. Or you could put anything in there. I think she's using different types of like seeds and looking at them because those are easy to manipulate. But and then that's but that's another thing that like you could use this sort of you don't have as nearly as much sort of convoluted signal as you would from the brain, but you do have these things you need to now there are machine learning techniques for like stitching together different images, and I know you put a reference in the Slack on that too.
Well, because that was actually an electrical geodesics project.
Right.
Was working on photogrammetry. For a while we were all working on photogrammetry.
Oh yeah.
So I've got this big 11 camera array downstairs in a geodesic dome. Seriously, I'll bring it up. But yeah, and now the software for that is a part of so many projects because people are stitching together multiple 2D pictures for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious about the Gibsonian information paper.
Yeah.
You talk about a parallel with that and SLAM in robotics.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that, I mean, I'd love to learn more about that in terms of how it differs. I mean, partly just I think that would really help me get a better sense of like computationally what that means, and so SLAM was the first, when you had that kind of parallel to it, then I could imagine like, oh, okay, it's more than just an image. It's it can have a lot of additional information with it. Right?
Yeah, I mean that was an example we were using in there, but like I don't know to think about more about how that would apply, because like in the papers I've been writing on that, it's like you have these examples of, it's kind of like theoretical examples, but like so the idea of Gibsonian information is where you have sensory input from the world and it's distributed in a certain way. So if you have structure, it's like there's a distribution that's not like Gaussian. If you had a Gaussian world, it would be all blurry. If you have a non-Gaussian world, there's structure in it. And so the idea is you have the structure comes into the nervous system. There's some, maybe some rudimentary representation, but largely we're interested in the sensory inputs and the information there, and then how it's being merged in the brain into like the different sensory channels, how that gets merged, and how that if you have like congruency amongst the sensory channels, that's a higher Gibsonian information. And then there's also an emphasis on collective behavior, where you have agents that are sort of coordinating their behavior. So there are different layers of information there. In the conference paper, we didn't really lay out what those layers are, but I mean there are, it's like layers of Gibsonian information. So an agent in an single agent's brain, there's a certain amount of Gibsonian information of the scene that they're encountering. It's both visual, but it's also haptic, it's auditory, and then aligning all those signals. And then every agent, say in a population, they have their own Gibsonian information in their own brains, but then in their collective behavior, there's going to be some Gibsonian information shared. And so, but I mean, that's just something it's not something that was considered in the paper. But with respect to SLAM, I don't really know. I don't really have an answer right now for that. But
well, I mean, so it could certainly be. I mean, I guess I just meant more of like it's how does it differ from a world model? Like, how does it differ from a world model, or how does it differ from some of the computations that you would you'd basically apply to the sensory stream that that agents? So in some of these, agent-based modeling papers, they're talking about, doing operations on the input stream. And again, I guess I'm just trying to get at, like, what would I actually compute? And can I compute, this kind of Gibsonian information, and can I compute, Shannon information in some of these kind of toy environments, so that I can see, when those line and when they diverge.
Right. Well, I mean, maybe there's another paper where those computations are done like in a very systematic way, because right now we're just proposing sort of the idea of how this would work. But the idea would be that you'd be computing Gibsonian information maybe based on certain statistical properties of the sensory streams. It's different from Shannon information. That Shannon information is about uncertainty or diversity, and this is more about sort of alignment and some of the sort of the spatiotemporal variations. And it's not really like the overall variation. It's like if you have like if you have things that happen in time, like in terms of like spikes in time where you encounter a lot of sensory input like now, but maybe in 2 hours from now you'll experience more sensory input, and then there's this gap between them. So if you're building a representation, that might have some role to play in how it works if you're trying to interact with the world. So like if I'm trying to interact with the world and I have to update every 5 minutes, and I'm only getting sensory information every 2 hours, if I get a big clump of sensory information, that's going to be misaligned in time. Same thing in different sensory modalities or in space. If I have like a sound that's coming from behind me and some visual information coming from in front of me, that's misaligned. Or if I have like something that is incongruent in space, if I have things in different points in space that give me the full suite of sensory information I need, that's going to be a little bit harder to integrate. And so the measures, it's like having a table of the measures in different scenarios. We don't have that, but that's kind of where we would be headed.
So it could be a little more like the IIT.
Somewhat. I mean, yeah, I don't.
It seems much more. No, I'm not sure. I mean,
Okay.
the integrated was really.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there is that aspect of it, but I mean, I'm working on some like a better like review of this, because the conference paper that we have is very abbreviated, and there's a preprint, but it needs to be updated on some of the stuff. So that's something. It's
So in information theory, I dropped in, Levin's project together with ASU.
Oh yeah.
Which for their kind of information theoretic complexity measures. It was interesting. I've actually not been able to build on that, so I'll figure out that. It could be anyway. I think my GCC might be just too new. Then what's his name? Marseille has a project, Freet, that I dropped in, but it could drop in. Is it Tononi?
Yeah.
That I think theirs is it's called Phi. So anyway, there's a Python project too. I mean, and part of that again is like I'm hoping that maybe with one of these agent environments that we could be like computing multiple measures and seeing when they diverge. The SLAM is definitely has sensory input, but is also it's kind of got variables that it's going to place in there that are beyond kind of the sensation, right?
Yeah.
Again, like giving you a sense of your place in the world and your orientation and things like that, right? That, we could be computing in a couple different ways.
Yeah, we'll have to go through that a little bit more in depth at some point, because I think there's a lot of promise there, but it's like it has to be, have to figure out how things fit into the pantheon of things in the world. Like, how does it deal with this sort of thing or that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I assume if the world was a little richer, right? So Pong obviously is kind of like bare bones,
right?
But if it was more Doom focused, and there could be tools and things, it would be interesting to again see how those change when given the agent's goal, like how the processing of the sensation would be different when they're looking at tools and things.
Yeah. I'm just writing some notes here.
Yeah.
So, Jesse, did you have anything to add to this conversation? It sounds like something you might have some points on you might want to mention. Feel free to type into the chat if you want. All right. Okay. Anything you want me to follow up on? Well, for right now, I think we're kind of thinking about these things very broadly. So I don't except the Gibsonian information stuff. Maybe we'll try to get narrow down on that a bit and go through it, because it's something that I think has a lot of promise, but it needs more work, and we need to figure out how it fits together, maybe how to test some of this, measure some of it in agents. I mean, it's primarily a theory for agents, and maybe how to develop agents that are, able to do some of these things that aren't addressed by conventional applications of information theory. Although there are all sorts of papers I see where people talk about different types of information theory, and people are coming up with new types of information theory, and I don't really know where we fit into that, and I don't know if we care. It's just a matter of saying, here's what we think is important, and here's what they look like, and sketching that out. So from just a purely theoretical standpoint, it's nice to have all these things laid out, but then in a specific system, how can we put together how does it get measured, and how does it become ultimately useful? So yeah, Jesse, we'll talk more about some of these things more specifically, maybe thinking about thinking more about some of these things in your case, thinking more about embodiment and how we might how that fits into this. And so that's I think the action item is, usually don't put thinking as an action item, but sometimes thinking more clearly is an action item, or coming up with better ways to sort of give examples of things. So it's I can say, I can make a set of predictions, but I don't know, I can test them, but I can also make them more clear and say this is exactly what we expect, or so. Yeah. All right. So let's see. What did I want to talk about? So I have some other things I'm going to talk about here. So another thing that came up is this thing that I don't know who posted this in the Slack, but this was about continual learning. And this is another thing that we've talked about a lot, where we have this continual learning interest. And in this group, they're talking about lifelong learning, continual machine learning course. So this is a course where they go through some of these, with respect to machine learning, there's this idea of continual learning. So this is going beyond sort of training your model and testing it. And this is, going on about like how a model might learn continually through time in its environment. So, it starts out and it starts to behave over maybe a month or a year. If you have a system embedded in the environment, like it's maybe like a climate gauge where you want to know what the climate variation is. You want the system to learn from past data, integrated into a more, a deeper answer than you would have if you were just training it on data and then getting an insight. So these are things that are. So I have this figure blown up here. I think it's in this folder. Yeah. So this is the mind map. I like this because this is like the kind of mind map we talk about in the lab as well. So this has a dual purpose. It talks about continual learning, and it summarizes everything, but it also is this mind map. And so you can see from the mind map, they have these different places in the space, and they have these citations, and they have quotes from the paper. So this is continual learning. They have it modeled as a neuron. That's kind of interesting. So the inputs to the neuron, it's like online learning, open world learning, multitask learning, active learning, curriculum learning, which is where you're learning from prior knowledge. Active learning, you're learning kind of from the environment. Like sometimes they call it query learning because you're kind of searching the environment for things. Multitask learning, where you're learning from different tasks. Something called federated learning, which is this, you leave your data distributed in the environment, and then you're drawing from those distributions. So, it's like, if you think about it in the open source context, if we have instances of our open source software in different parts of the world, we can learn about how people use the program in different places. And you can't do that by maybe having a centralized survey, but you can learn it from going out and putting instances out in the world and then getting reports back as to how it's being used. So that's one example of federation, but this federated learning is where you have different.
I put in a psychiatric example in computational psychiatry. So I think it was like multiple at-risk youth centers.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do predictions of violence, right? And so if you can imagine that, like, each facility has, 100 students, or but if all 10 of them can pool their data together, their predictions are much more accurate. But because of privacy, they couldn't do that. Right?
Yeah, well, that's a thing you have to worry about. Yeah.
Yeah. So federated learning was a way that they could share their data and have those predictions utilize the greater N, but not sacrifice privacy.
Right. So here's I don't know if I was sharing my screen before, but this is the model here that they're doing. So they have this. So these are all like inputs into continual learning, and I get the impression that sometimes people talk about it as like this, learning over long periods of time as you're getting inputs and diverse inputs. And here it seems like there's a little bit of a difference in that you have these different forms of learning, and they're all kind of being integrated. So, instead of having like a training set and training your model and saying that's pretty much it, that's all the information you need, they have all these different types of learning that they consider. So the model needs to learn different things or in different ways. And, this requires different sort of training sets and maintenance of the knowledge base and things like that. And then it goes into this continual learning pot, which is, again, it's this process. And then you have these outputs, which are transfer learning, where you can transfer from one domain to another. You have domain adaptation, where you can adapt your model to different domains. So, they're like knowledge areas like driving or cooking meal or interacting with a chatbot. Those are all different domains. And training is often something that, you want to be able to transfer anything that's learned, say, in driving to like a chatbot context, which is quite a shift in expertise, but you want to be able to do as much as possible. And then you have few-shot learning, where you have these different, the a sparse number of examples for certain things, and you want it to kind of learn from sort of that limited amount of data. And then meta-learning, which is where you're learning about learning. So you're learning about the learning process. So this is the course here. They kind of go over all of this. This is an iClear thing from iClear 22. So I guess this is more of a roadmap maybe than it's a course, but like it's more of a roadmap in the sense that this is what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to lay out this roadmap for people and showing all the parts of this and how this fits into continual learning. Now, in the world of agents, in some ways, continual learning is, and the way I think of this is where you have, learning over a long period of time. So, you might have the environment's going to change. The agent will probably change because you're giving it information, you're training it on different tasks constantly, and it's living its life, as it were, and it's having to do all these things. It's having to encounter things on the fly. It's having to learn different types of curricula, so it has your plans might change, the world changes, procedures change, and then you have these domains that you want to learn about that can change and interact in different ways. So, any other thoughts about that? I know continual learning is, it's an interesting topic. It's kind of a hot topic, but I don't know how, it just seems like it's not something that is generally talked about too much outside of that specialized area, so.
It's a big difference between, this subject is I don't want to say theoretical, but the subject is science versus the subject is engineering, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure the engineers would love to have always-on systems that can do incremental learning and things like that. But this is certainly a great way to find out why we don't have those now.
Yeah.
It's a great course. They're I think they're on like week 7 or 8 or anyway. Videos are on YouTube, and it's kind of the opposite, or it's not one of these MOOCs, or it's still like a small, very accessible group to
Yeah, it's you have to check it out. The Owl with 2 L's lab here.
Yeah.
So, see, anything else anyone wanted to mention before we move on? I know that we're going through ideas fast. Okay. So, let's see. All right, that's it. Now, why don't I talk a little bit about, I know we don't have a lot in terms of submissions, but I wanted to go through our submissions document, which we kind of go through on a weekly basis. Oh, come on. I'm having trouble sharing my screen here. There we go. Okay, so I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see it?
No, can't see it.
All right. Yeah, I may have to switch to the window here. Edge tab. Right. There we go. You see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
So this is our submissions document. This is like we have a couple things that are... So we had a couple things that were accepted. This is the Bika AI conference, which is something we did last year. I found out this week that we got an acceptance of the layering and folding paper, which is this... I think I talked about it earlier this year. This is a follow-up to the MetaBrains paper. So this is using MetaBrains to look at sort of semi-neuronal cognition. So the idea is you have these layers and folds in biology that serve as information processing structures, or rather that those things can be information processing structures. And then kind of giving sort of an example from the gut and some other structures in the body. So this kind of goes through this sort of semi-neuronal information processing. So in this case, you do have neurons in the gut, say, that sense different aspects of what's going on there, different pressure sensors and chemical sensors and things like that. And I mean, like sensory organs, not biologic or not like synthetic sensors. But then you also have things like muscle and skin cells and things where they're acting collectively and they're getting information and processing things locally. So there's this so that's been accepted, and that's interpreted in this MetaBrains according to this MetaBrains approach. And we submitted a paper, and the paper is I guess accepted in a proceedings, and then there needs to be a presentation on this. So we need to have a presentation on it, and we'll work on that. This is the paper that was submitted to A-Life, but it was rejected from A-Life because I didn't think it was a very good fit for A-Life. I didn't actually expect it to be a very good fit for this conference, but I guess they're interested in it, so that's good. We have this other thing. So I am going to NetSci myself. It's a conference, NetSci 22. This is the major networks conference in the field, and they have a lot of interesting talks on different aspects of network science. And so I'm doing a talk for the DevoWorm group on embryo networks. And so this is an approach that developed within DevoWorm for looking at embryos and using networks to understand the relationships between cells and different aspects of morphogenesis. But there are satellites to NetSci. And so the reason I bring up NetSci is because there are a couple of satellites that are of interest, perhaps, to this group. I made a submission in NetBiomed, which is another satellite of NetSci, on some other work that's not really related to what we're doing here. But there's this other opportunity, which is network neuroscience. And that's a major satellite of NetSci. And this is, I think, a really nice satellite because they have a lot of interesting top names in the field. A lot of it is fMRI, deriving networks from fMRI and from EEG. But there are other types of approaches. And so last year I did a poster with some people in the DevoWorm group on looking at deep learning and some of the networks that can be derived from embryos and the intersection with that and deep learning. And it was it's on the DevoWorm website, the presentation on that poster. And so this year I'm not really sure what we might submit. We have to submit something if we want to do this by the end of this coming week. But I'm just wondering if Morgan or if maybe Amanda or someone else has an idea of what we might do for this. I'm just, I'm open to different suggestions if you have suggestions. But I think if you submit for the poster session, they're a bit more broad in terms of what they'll accept than the main track. But it's still a nice opportunity to participate in it. And then, the conference itself is very interesting. There was a lot of network science is basically where you have people implementing different techniques to analyze networks. In the NetSci conferences in the past, they've had a lot of like analyzing social media data. They've had a lot of things like analyzing fMRI data, looking at brain networks, looking at social networks, looking at other types of networks. And sometimes you get papers that are really interesting that analyze an area that you've never thought that was possible. But there's definitely it's always food for thought. So there's that opportunity. There's this multi-agent behavior at CVPR, and I think that might be something that Morgan is attending. Did you say you were attending something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to try and be a fly on the wall there.
Okay, so you're just attending that, or I might just put that as green instead. That means that we're participating in it, so that's good. One of us is participating in it. Yeah, that would be interesting if you could report back on that. These are definitely, these little conferences opportunities are always good for learning new things, and it's good. This one, generative adversarial collaborations, is something that we mentioned several weeks ago. We didn't put anything in for it because maybe we didn't know, like it's not remote and we didn't know what was involved in it. But I think that they've done their selections for this year. Yeah, this is it. Okay, I don't know if you can still see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So this is actually these GACs for this year. So these were accepted, and it looks like they're going to do an NBDT special issue, which is this journal. It's like an online journal where it's like minimal reviewer hassle or whatever. I don't know what the but in any case, they have this issue. NBDT has a special issue that they're sponsoring for this. And so the sessions there are a couple of sessions here. The first is, how can we optimally use neuroscience data to guide the next generation of brain models of the primate visual and linguistic cognition? So this is pretty specific. This is basically using, I guess, secondary data to guide brain models for these different areas of cognition in primates. So this is Conrad Cording's involved in this one, and a couple other people. And this is kind of an interesting session. The second session is, to what extent does the brain simulate the external world? So this is something more about like about representations and how those work. So Josh Tenenbaum is in there, Ernest Davis, who does stuff with Gary Marcus, and some other people are in here. And then you have, what is the place of planning? So this is about planning as a sort of a state of the brain. So again, like you have these internal representations of the external world, simulating the external world, and then planning. So that's what they were looking for. This one, let's see. Okay, so this one actually, this is the way it's kind of structured, the proposal. Are there problems that fundamentally require planning and it cannot be solved via model-free learning? If so, what defines those problems? And so this kind of talks about the intersection between reinforcement learning and deep learning, and then some of these issues surrounding planning and, things that aren't really captured very well with models and model-free, or, that even model-free learning that is not model-dependent. So this is, one of these classic areas where you identify something that's sort of a hard problem, and then you attack it. You don't attack the problem necessarily. You just kind of get ideas about how you might solve this. And so, they're interested in discussing the evolutionary process that constrained the specific place planning has in nature. So how is and then if it's possible to use this information to determine planning's applicable domains in AI. So just kind of situating this idea of planning and how it can be approached. And so these are very much sort of maybe one of these field finding exercises where you're trying to find, trying to sort of situate these ideas in a broader context. You're trying to figure out how to solve them. So this one, again, this is our ability to imagine future and past states of the world to help us reason, infer, and plan. We can predict what will happen when dishes are too precariously stacked, which businesses we might pass on a drive to a friend's house, and how our lives and careers might unfold. And so this ability seems critical to our ability to act in the world, allowing us to avoid negative consequences. But then the computational basis of this remains poorly understood. So being able to simulate different scenarios in our head is really what they're trying to capture. But then, being able to kind of figure that out, what that looks like computationally is the problem. And so they're going to take an interdisciplinary approach, draw from different areas, and then try in this session to synthesize those. So, that's what they're approaching for this. I don't know if anyone's attending. Are you attending this, Morgan, or this session? Or
I hope to, if they will. Yeah, I mean it's in San Francisco, so
yeah.
Don't have to go far.
Yeah. So good. So that's something, and if you could report back on that'd be interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then we have some things coming up. Neuromatch 5, be on the lookout for that. And then this EI, which is the Embodied Intelligence 2023, kind of still formulating what that's going to look like. And then some other projects that are kind of ongoing. So again, if we have new things that we want to put in the list, I guess I can make another pass on the events channel of the Slack. So we have this event discussion or announcements. I can't remember what the announcements channel is, but there's an announcements channel in here as well. And if you have ideas, we can put it in there. And a call for involvement, I think, is the one. These are different channels we can put things in. If we were interested in doing something like that. So, okay.
So you're gonna go to Shanghai?
No, it's virtual. It says Shanghai, but everything it says Shanghai is virtual. I'm not that adventurous right now, but that's okay. I mean, that's what they were planning, and I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to do that. But then they said it was virtual. I was like, well, all right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's awesome. I mean, it's my wife's parents have been in lockdown for like 3 months there.
Yeah.
But okay, it's virtual. That's great. I mean, the satellites. It's great set of satellite workshops.
Yeah. So again, like if there's Erin. Hi, Erin. So if we have any ideas about that, like network neuroscience in particular, that would be, something we could do. But yeah. So, okay. Hi, Erin. How are you? Any questions before we move on, or? Okay. I'm going to talk about. There's this thing that was going on this week. I don't know if I was a Twitter dust up about like how there was someone at Google Brain who thought that there's a language learning model that was like sentient, and they found out the guy was like, I guess he's a priest, and he's really he kind of wants to believe that the model is sentient, and there's this dust up about how it's not sentient, and but then I found that discussion fascinating because it kind of went beyond like kind of the point, which was like I'm not surprised that eventually people are going to find large language models to be of some meaning to them. So, like, people are interacting with these models in the real world. They're really interacting with things that they may find, some meaning in, or that they find maybe sentient, or because we don't have, like the scientists who study it have definitions of it, but then, it's like there's a common definition of sentience, which is maybe different than that. And so I saw some like nods of recognition on that, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, my first thought was like, do you worry about that particular story, or that the Chinese detected aliens?
Oh yeah.
Right. It's like which should I tackle? but it is interesting, right? I mean, weren't people thinking that Dali had some sort of secret language?
Yeah.
And I did think it was interesting that like the conversation had gotten kind of the conversation left where I thought it had started, and people have trouble interpreting agency all the time, or in particular, and there's a group of people for whom that becomes clinical, right? So it's again, I really don't know the backstory of this particular Google engineer.
Oh yeah.
But yeah.
I got into a lot of weird conversations about this because I have a friend who's just convinced that, well, if he says it's sentient, then it's sentient, okay? And like, no matter how much I explain why, it's just absolutely impossible. I think Timnit and Margaret Mitchell, Timnit Gebru and Margaret Mitchell wrote a great book and a great article on this, laying out the most important problem, which has come out of all my conversations about this, which has been that it's not possible by our definitions, like you were saying, Morgan. However, it is possible from a social construction angle. If everyone decides that the AI is sentient, then the AI, for all intents and purposes, is sentient. That's kind of where I've come down with my friend that I've been arguing with this about, is like, well, I guess you're making a good point in that, yeah, if enough people become convinced and it becomes part of the culture, then sure, it's, I guess, from that angle, that's true. And that's what Timnit and Margaret Mitchell write really well about, is about that this is the problem, that if we don't kind of try to make the explanations of this more accessible or take it more seriously, that these kinds of things will happen, that society will decide without AI researchers having a say that this large language model is sentient. It's going to be weird.
Yeah.
Hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that does, like, there are a lot of philosophy of science and other types of questions about like religion and things that because you imagine when people start interacting with this, that there are going to be things that people are going to interpret in different ways, not just as we wish they would, and that's kind of the point. Amanda, did you have anything to say about it? Or
I think the constructivist take is really interesting, especially since sentience, I don't know how possible that is to fully define in like a technical way, and then even if it is, like making that accessible and like understandable. So like, yeah, if we all start treating an AI in a certain way, that like kind of determines the reality of that thing. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Brian, could you pull up that article and post and link to it in the chat?
Sure, yeah, the Timnit Gebru and
yeah,
because I thought that was really good. Emily Bender tried to write one before it, and it was a little too dismissive of the idea that the AI could be sentient, and didn't take it seriously. Here it is. Get it on there.
Oh, okay, there it is. Okay. So
and what's interesting is that Blake Lemoine, I guess, in addition to being a priest, also was working with Google as an engineer in the responsible AI program and also identifies as cognitive scientist. And the main reason that he gives for believing that it's sentient is that it told him it was.
Okay.
And he's like, well, look, I mean, if somebody says they're sentient, I gotta believe them.
I mean, again, it's like the psychiatric side of this, and I don't mean to say like that people must be clinical to believe this, but like Melanie Mitchell obviously talks about the overwhelming instinct we have to ascribe any kind of verbal communication to another a person. Like our theory of mind is so strong,
right?
But it really, I mean, again, it's as there's more interaction, I mean, mainly like Siri and the other interactive bots don't work enough don't work enough for us to have formed that, but like this problem will only get much worse.
Right.
Yeah, don't tell my mom that, Morgan. She thinks Alexa's alive. She's.
I mean, I can't get Alexa. If Alexa is alive, like Alexa refuses to do anything I ask her.
Yeah.
That's all Skynet is here now. Obviously we have to move beyond imitation game because mainly because we don't have enough time to interview the agents to finally find some error, right? Which is what the original imitation game was just assumed would be faster to do. But I thought it was interesting. Saw Gwern on Reddit, talking about Montezuma's Revenge, and like the latest. No, it is relevant, and it was just saying that like the particular agent that had achieved state of the art performance, right, only visited 20 of the 24 rooms or something. Anyway, his point was like, like this isn't Montezuma's Revenge isn't done, right? And but the connection back to imitation game is that like you're gonna have to really like sitting down with the Cyborg and Blade Runner, like it will be a 3-month operation to try and like it's not going to be a fast thing if as these agents get more, the models get super big and the complexity of the speech is more sophisticated. But again, it's like it's not conscious. Like it's
So I'm gonna share my screen. I wanted to share some things about this. Okay, so where are we here? There we go. Just trying to find the correct window here. I think this is it. Okay, so this is the... Okay, so this was the issue here. We talked about the original idea of something being sentient, and then Gary Marcus, of course, as he always does, wrote an article on it. Nonsense on Stilts. So this is his, this is Abeba Burhani's take on it, which is we've arrived at peak AI hype accompanied by minimal critical thinking. And then someone here, Alberto Delgado, it is mystical to hope for awareness, understanding common sense from symbols and data processing using parametric functions in higher dimensions. And so then, Gary Marcus goes through sort of his take on it, which is that the idea is ridiculous, that it's, but he does bring up something about this idea of pareidolia. And so pareidolia, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it's this idea of finding patterns in things that don't have the pattern in it. For example, this is an anthropomorphic bias that allows humans to see Mother Teresa in the image of a cinnamon bun. So you've seen like different things where people will, see patterns in like faces in inanimate objects because it looks like the face. They can see the pattern and then they interpret it that way. And so that's what one of the things that he's talking about with pareidolia, and that of course this is something that actually we've talked about this in the past in the Devoworm group in terms of whether algorithms can like there's this whole sub area of research where algorithms are able to either experience or exploit pareidolia for purposes of, sometimes it's machine learning error. So if an algorithm like encounters some data that have a pattern in it that's clearly not the thing that it's trying to classify, but it classifies it as like, if you show it a picture of like some skin, like a close-up image of skin, if you're imaging skin, or if you have a picture of a tortilla or something that's a close-up, it'll find things in that texture that look like a pattern and misclassify it. Or the machine learning algorithm can actually interpret things that are not necessarily there. So that's an interesting area. But also people interpreting like the output of different algorithms in the same way. So we've talked about how people think, okay, this is alive, or that there's this interesting pattern in like a GAN that looks like something mystical. So there's a lot of potential for this idea of pareidolia in machine learning and in deep learning and all these other areas. So yeah, we talked about how Blake Lemon, who's the person who proposed this, he's an AI safety person, and so this is pretty critical of the idea. And then I'm not saying that no software ever connects to its digital bits to the world, such as the infamous Chinese room thought experiment, or turn-by-turn navigation systems connect their bits to the world just fine. So there's this idea of connecting your bits to the world. So, of course, the Chinese room thought experiment was this idea, and this is from sort of the philosophy of mind literature, cognitive science literature, where you have this room and you take, like there's a person outside the room and they take these cards and they write things in Chinese and they're actual phrases, and they pass them into the room. And then someone in the room, we don't know who it is, takes the card. We think they read it. They pass a response out. So there's an output. And the output either makes sense or it doesn't. But if the output makes sense, we have to assume that there's someone in the room that's looking at the input, picking the appropriate output and passing it out. But there's no evidence that there's anyone in the room doing that. It could just be that the input, goes in, and then there's a random output, and that random output happens to match to something that's understandable or something that makes sense. So maybe you think it makes sense, and you say, well, okay, there's someone in the room that is making this conscious decision, but as it turns out, it's just a random process where there's a card that comes into the room, there's an output that goes out of the room, and then that loop is interpreted to make some sort of sense. Or people try to find meaning in those outputs. I mean, you can imagine like if you had trying to think of an example where you have some sage that is, you go to visit some sage and they say something like they give you some advice. You tell them your problem, they give you some advice, and then you try to interpret the advice. The advice may just be something that they just made up, or it could be something that's connected to some wisdom. It's a broader wisdom. And so that's a similar idea. We're just finding meaning in something that someone says, or, so there's a lot of that sort of thing going on. And I agree, there's a lot that it goes beyond the Chinese room experiment to say that people try to make meaning out of things. And when you have these kind of technologies in the world, people are going to try to make meaning out of them as well. But this idea of connecting their bits to the world is interesting too, because turn-by-turn navigation systems, for example, are things that really map to something in the world that's sort of concrete. So, this is navigation systems connect to a map, or at least something that we imagine as a map. So, navigation systems connect to, like a map of a city that we make that's systematic, that's a formal map of space that is drawn out and accepted across, society. But we do a lot of different types of, we draw a lot of different types of maps in our heads. We have different types of maps that exist in the world that people draw. They're maps of a city, say, for example, where all the streets are labeled and they're, laid out in a way that's rational. But a lot of people, when they give directions, it's a lot less formal than that. And so, imagine if you had instead of a turn-by-turn navigation system, you had a system in your car that gave you sort of directions in a very intuitive way. So it said, go down the street, turn left at the red house, and then go down to the bicycle in the driveway, and, you're at your destination. That would be a bit harder to follow. I mean, you could follow it, but maybe it wouldn't be as easy to follow. But this idea of connecting the bits to the world, you're talking about connecting the representation to something in the world that is, sort of a common representation or common understanding of it. And so, maybe this is a bit materialist, this idea of connecting its bits to the world. And maybe when you're dealing with things that are less materialist, like meaning that this isn't really this just simply isn't possible. So I don't know what the answer is here, but I think it's an interesting thing maybe to follow up on. There's another take here. We should never have called it language modeling all those years ago. It was and still is word sequence modeling. Confusion always occurs when you label an algorithm with the name of a problem you're trying to solve rather than what it actually does. And so that's another thing that, and so there's just a lot of different takes on this. Like people have like kind of as these things go, they kind of go all over the place. And the people brought up the Turing test, which is like, this idea of looking at whether a machine can think. I'm not going to get into the details of a Turing test, but that's been brought up. So then there's also, in the process of this, people brought up the idea that the Turing test itself has been deeply criticized. So we think about Turing tests as sort of a benchmark for, maybe computers being thinking for themselves or being autonomous, not necessarily sentient. But even that is flawed because, coming up with a good Turing test is hard. And so these are things that, these are things you learn about in computer science class, and then you learn about it and you think, well, this is, pretty much what we have to aim for. And then you find out that maybe this isn't even something that's possible, or maybe it's a deeply flawed concept. So this is one of the benefits of some of these debates, is that you learn things about the conventions of the field that are maybe you didn't think about before. So so he talks actually in this article about statistical association. So there's this, where it was down towards the end here. Yeah, honestly, if the system wasn't just a stupid statistical pattern associator, it would be like a sociopath. So there's this guy, Stephen Piantadosi, who actually was at one of the sessions on, I can't remember the name of the lecture series, but he was a part of the, he was sponsored a couple weeks ago in this lecture series, and he's interested in culture and other things and AI, and it's kind of interesting. So his take on this was that I'm trying to find the right sequence of things that I captured on this, but so he went into this a little bit more deeply, and he said, it's kind of missing the point to say that it's it's silliness because there is this component or this use for meaning. So it kind of went through some of these things. A couple of things. It was a really long thread, so I don't know where to start with this. So he just kind of goes through a bunch of aspects of meaning and what some people have thought about. So one thing is he talks about Bender and Kohler, who use meaning to be a linkage between language and anything else, typically stuff in the world. Their octopus test shows how knowing patterns in language won't necessarily let you generalize to the world. So this is, again, drawing from some of the theories that exist in the literature to kind of interpret what's going on here with respect to meaning. I guess I lean agnostic on meaning because there are cognitive theories of meaning that seem accessible to large language models, and they happen to be some of the most compelling ones. So we talked about large language models being sort of the grist for cognitive science, I think it was last week, and now we're still dealing with this problem, trying to apply existing theories to large language models. One is that meaning is determined, at least in part, by the relationships between concepts as well as the role they play in a bigger conceptual theory. To use Ned Block's example, F equals ma in physics, which is force equals mass times acceleration, isn't really a definition of force, nor is it a definition of mass or acceleration. It sort of defines all three. You can't understand any one of them without the others. So in this case, what they're saying is this symbolic representation of force relies on two other things that have to be equally as defined. And so if you have this set of concepts, this set of three concepts, and it's actually four concepts because equals has to be defined. But you have this set of symbols. You have to know what the definitions underlying each symbol is, and then you can make this, you can make a statement about force. Then he talks about smart pattern matching. So there's a smart pattern matching model. This means that a smart pattern matching model, and this is an example here, I'm not sure I can zoom in on this, but this is a cluster analysis of linguistic data. So this is kind of a hierarchical analysis of this, where you have consonants and their different aspects of speech, and then you have this representation here. So a smart pattern matching model might in principle acquire any computational structure seen in the history of cognitive science and neuroscience. So, I guess the pattern matching, what he's saying is that if you match a pattern, you can model the internal model of that pattern matching process to any one of these sort of models. So you could have this model of like linguistic generation or language production. You can have this model of the body, which is where you have the body here, and you're composing it out of a head, a trunk, an arm, and a leg, and then those things in turn are composed by other parts. And then you can put them into a cluster analysis here, and you can show that they exist in the space. And so, there's this idea that a smart pattern matching model is intelligent, but that intelligence can be modeled by any sort of model. That's kind of an intriguing idea. I'm not sure I'm interpreting that right, but I think what he's saying is that if you have some process that's doing pattern matching, it's theoretically you can use any type of model to sort of explain that and how that output is generated. And so you can see that, there are different ways you can interpret it. That relates to theories and sort of you can make up any theory. You have to test it, of course, in the world, but the internal aspect of that is you can make any interpretation you want in a sense. So from the octopus example, conceptual rules don't capture everything we know, but they do capture something. And there are even examples of abstract concepts like prime numbers, where that something is almost everything. And then it's hard to imagine how large language models could generate language or encode semantic information but at least some pieces of conceptual role, maybe real meaning being there, all learned from language. So this is a paper, Semantic Projection Recovers Rich Human Knowledge of Multiple Objects. And this is where they're doing a projection space of different words in their semantic content. They have this scale between small and large, and they've kind of mapped these different animals onto this space. And this is the semantic model. So this is actually the paper here, I think. And the title of this paper is Semantic Projection Recovers Rich Human Knowledge of Multiple Object Features from Word Embeddings. And so this is a paper where they look at like these large language models and the word embeddings, and they look at like they have a method for semantic projection for these. And so this is, this has a lot to do with like meaning and actually cultural diversity in meaning. And it's kind of an interesting paper because it kind of deals with some of these large language models, and it kind of answers some, where it draws out some of these ideas of meaning. So how is knowledge about word meaning represented in the mental lexicon? Current computational models infer word meanings from lexical co-occurrence patterns. So, this is just basically what a large language model is doing. It's not that difficult, although it's doing this at a large scale. They learn to represent words as vectors in a multidimensional space. So you have a word, you have a bunch of symbols, you have to interpret it as a vector, and then you map it to this multidimensional space, wherein words that are used in more similar linguistic contexts, that is, are more semantically related. And they use these relational dimensions. So like, you have basically a similarity metric on one dimension. You say, how is it similar? Is it similar in terms of the characters used, or is it similar in terms of maybe the meaning? And you can basically create these different dimensions where there's the semantic relation or sometimes a syntactic relation. And you can cluster words based on those criteria. So in this case, words that are more semantically related are located closer together on one of these dimensions. And so this is basically how you come to have associations between words and sentences. However, whereas interword proximity captures only overall relatedness, human judgments are highly context dependent. For example, dolphins and alligators are similar in size, but different in dangerousness. So the semantic content is actually, it's diverse, and sometimes the semantic context can differ based on the actual thing that you're looking at. So if you're looking at size, dolphin and alligator are similar, but in dangerousness, they're not. And so those different spaces are going to have a different set of properties. Here we use a domain general method to extract context-dependent relationships from word embeddings, semantic projection of word vectors onto lines that represent features such as size, the line connecting small and big, the words small and big, which are properties, not necessarily just words, but they're properties of a thing. And so the words are describing the things, and they're put along this line. So they're using like smaller, big, size, or danger, safe to dangerous, analogous to mental scales. So these are like where you have a scale from one end to another, and there's a variation within. This method recovers human judgments across various object categories and properties. Thus, the geometry of word embeddings explicitly represents a wealth of context-dependent word knowledge. So this is just something inherent in these models. As it turns out, these models model the language in different ways that we can extract some of these sort of semantic properties. So I don't know if they have this figure in this paper. Okay, here's the figure that we just saw in the previous tweet. This is figure 1. This is a schematic illustration of semantic projection. These are word vectors in the category animals. So you have this scale, which is small to large. And this is in a three-dimensional space. So there are 3 dimensions here that are being collapsed to a single linear scale. And then these blue lines are the distance of these different objects from this multi-dimensional scaling. So you have mosquito, chipmunk, bee, ant, and they're in different distances from this median. So like small and large. So basically horse is very different from cheetah, or turtle is different from cheetah, but in a different way. Swordfish is different from seal in this direction. Dog is in this direction. So you have these. So they I think they talk about this a little bit. There's an orthogonal projection here from this feature subspace, defined as the vector difference between large and small red circles. The 3 dimensions in the figure are arbitrary and were chosen via principal component analysis to enhance visualization. So one of the things about these high dimensional spaces is you have to like plot them so you can see them. So these are like arbitrary dimensions. These are like principal components, and then you have this median here, which shows the scale. So the scale has these 3 principal components, and then these are the differences between, or the projections off of the scale for these different objects. So this is where the information lies in these models. I mean, this isn't meaning, this is very vastly different, but this is, it just kind of goes through how you can extract this type of information. So it's a really interesting paper, and it kind of talks about how, but I think the take-home message here, one of the take-home messages, is that when you have like these different criterion, that there are very different spaces that result in terms of meaning. So, you have danger or size or wetness, mythological creatures, animals, cities, and then cities meaning what? What properties of cities? So you have the same feature, different categories, or the same category with different features. And so there are different ways you can decompose this. It's really interesting that there's so much meaning in these large language models that you can quantify, but then there's this additional meaning that people can generate from their minds, and it's actually maybe quite different from these statistical analyses. I talked in a previous meeting about these CGS models and how they're kind of based on this idea of semantic scaling, semantic scales, and the diversity between like different concepts and words, but also objects. And so this is something that is inspired by this type of approach, but also may actually do some play a role in understanding a little bit more about some of if we could use connect these kind of models with a large language model, or at least the output of a large language model. I think that would be interesting, to say the least. But yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about that. I think it's interesting set of discussions there, and there's a lot we can learn from a lot of this. Talking about meaning is like kind of a octopus. I know they had an octopus model in the stuff I was talking about, but a different octopus. So yeah, we have in the chat, we have this, Amanda put the Chinese room as like a sort of a Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy level take on it, and it kind of explains what the background to it and what it is.
The explanation of the replies to the argument are really, the explanation's really good, and the replies are really interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the systems reply and the dialogue following that is really interesting, and is probably interesting applied to this particular example we were talking about, the large language model.
Yeah. So could you summarize that a little bit for us? Or?
I think the shortest version is that it's like kind of a homunculus concern. So like the person inside the Chinese room doesn't understand. They're just matching, symbols to words. But when we're talking about like the human brain, we're not talking about some homunculus inside of us. We're talking about the whole system. So maybe the Chinese room thought experiment like misses something really important by like zooming in too far, in a sense. But there are a few different versions of that objection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely, it's something that if you're interested, you can look into a little bit more, or ask Amanda about it in the Slack. I know she's interested in interested in moving philosophy forward in the group a little bit more. So Morgan or Brian have any thoughts on that, or any thoughts on what we were talking about here?
No, just kind of enjoying hearing about these issues from different perspectives. But yeah, I don't have anything to add at this time. I'm actually kind of sick and I think I might go to sleep now.
Okay.
I put a paper in, I think data sci, ML, I forget, but about emergent properties of large language models.
Oh yeah, that's good.
I mean, it's somewhat related. Or I hadn't seen this particular paper, but it is. I mean, it's interesting what is carried over in the training. But this is the big developmental story, or certainly the kind of developmental language story, right, would be completely different in terms of what you'd expect from the system, and how you train the system, and what you'd expect from the system. Right? It is really interesting what scientific concepts you can pull out of a large language model, or other things that people have done. And again, a lot of this is also of interest, just because people, or what I'm seeing is a real trend in taking trained models and using them and having other people use them, right? So that's the first thing, and that's still in a kind of an engineering way, but people are also taking models that were trained in other areas and applying them to new areas, and kind of just seeing what they'll do, right? In somewhat, I mean, it's kind of nice in it's also kind of in a Michael Levin kind of way, right? It's like with biology, it's like we don't know it until we actually kind of do it and see what it does, right? So I mean, I think it's like maybe Brian's thinking, like it's a fascinating area to see what they are capable of doing, and seeing how much of our the kind of language that we've left out there in the world that's being used for these training data sets has captured ideas and concepts and things. I mean, it's again, it's like it's only going to get richer, it's only going to get more sophisticated, but it's fundamentally it is not language acquisition in a biological way. So I think the developmental AI stories and ideas are kind of like much more interesting if you in particular care about like how do those systems become connected to the world and things like that. Like it's a different
right. It's kind of like we're just seeing here sort of as things are in the world, or maybe even just in the world of like online, where I don't know how they're training large language models. I imagine they have corpuses of things that are curated or things from the web that are unstructured, but it's not like I mean, it's limited in terms of how people speak, and then it's probably not even like, it's mostly maybe English or your major languages.
What?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's that's another big problem, right? But it's going to be really tough for us to tease apart the philosophy on this when we're basically looking at the language that we're looking at the communication that we ourselves use for inter-agent communication, right?
Yeah.
That's why this is so deceptive, and it's also interesting to look at the in terms of the collective cognition or collective intelligence question of like when can you get a group of people to behave collectively you know, in a kind of superior way, performance-wise. And if you, are allowing communication, the kind of multi-agent scenarios that have language in them are, again, like a very different context for these language models. So you'll see this as like human AI coordination, and whether it's using gestures or using language. There you like both sides have to have a model for interpreting.
Yeah.
And like gleaning the context and so it's kind of much more interesting than seeing the output of this super large model that's incorporated in all these concepts and things.
Yeah. All right. I think that's enough for today. So yeah, if we don't have anything else to say, it's probably okay. But we can continue the discussion in the Slack, and if there's something we want to come up with in terms of a more a broader idea, I encourage you to maybe write up we can do like a Medium post on it. We can do short presentation, or even something of arriving at a paper. But that's something that's of course an iterative process. We've also talked today about Gibsonian information, and I want to follow up on that. That's something we need to kind of, I think, in the next several meetings, talk about more. I'd like to be able to continue that conversation and develop it more. It may be pointing to specific things that are in the paper, in the preprint, or in the conference paper that we can kind of tease out. And then, other things that we want to talk about. I encourage you to, if you have a short presentation you want to give, or lead some discussion on some things, if you find, even if it's just some weird thing you found, and you get a collection of papers and tweets or whatever, and just present them, that's good too, because it does foster a lot of discussion. Okay. Well, thanks for attending. I know people are feeling ill, so I hope you get better soon. Have a good week. All right. Take care.
Take care.
See ya.